The angels appeared to the shepherds, but they didn't appear just to any shepherds. What they did was they actually appeared to the shepherds who were chosen and sanctified or set apart in order to be the breeders for the lambs that were going to become the sacrifices for the sins of the people. What they would do with those lambs when they were born was that they would take these strips of cloth, and these strips of cloth were actually called swaddling cloths. These swaddling cloths were to wrap up their legs to make sure that they weren't bruised, so that they could be lambs without blemish and without spot. What they were doing was large business. It had become so huge that these people began to take their eyes off of what they were doing and began to put their eyes upon what was really happening. And what was happening was there was big business. They weren't thinking about the forgiveness and the covering of the sins for another year. They were thinking more about the business that they were going to get, and how what they needed to do was that they needed to be ready for that special time of the year, because at that special time they needed to have enough lambs to be able to go around. And so that there was a night. And in this night, what occurred was that there was an angel that had come, and it was almost as though it was midday. And when this angel began to speak, he began to tell them of the sign that was about to occur. The sign to them that all of this thing was true, that unto us a child was born, unto us a son was given, unto us, you and I, we were given the forgiveness of sins completely, and his name would be called Emmanuel. All of these things the angel is now communicating. And he said, now here's the sign that you're going to see. That there is going to be a babe that's wrapped in swaddling cloths, lying in a manger. Now, what you need to understand about a manger was that a manger was no real proverbial animal Ritz-Carlton. The manger was really an animal cave. That's all that it was. It was a place where what they did was they kept the animals when it began to get too cold. And so they kept the animals inside there, but when all of the people were now coming to their city, because if you remember, it was Caesar Augustus that made the decision that everyone should go to their home city from where their family came to be taxed. So everyone was going there. Joseph's city, because he had come up from Bethlehem, they went down to Bethlehem. Now, I can't imagine for a moment that taking this 10-day ride from Nazareth down to Bethlehem on a donkey, how many times a 9-month pregnant woman had to stop to go to the bathroom. Last night, I spent my time thinking about that. Can you imagine? Every 10 minutes, this girl wanted to stop. It was just, you know, whenever, donkeys know nothing about pregnant women. They don't even think about it. When they just clop, and when they clippity at the time when they should have been cloppeting, what happened was that Mary needed to stop. And so it took so much longer. So much longer. And here she is. She's this girl that's probably in between somewhere of 13 to 14 years of age. Now, Mary was an interesting girl, because Mary was a girl that was really brought up understanding worldly ways, not worldliness. I mean, she wasn't this girl who was a bad girl by any sort of the imagination. On the contrary, she understood the word enough to be able to say to the angel, "Let it be unto me according to your word. That's how much that she knew. She knew how to be able to interface and communicate with God in ways that had never been done before. But Mary's father, history has shown that Mary's father was a librarian. And he was a librarian of the library of Sepphoris. And this librarian gave her an opportunity to really be educated. So Mary not only was someone who, being young and in her own mind an uneducated girl, yet her father was the librarian of Sepphoris, which was a city that Joseph actually had a lot to do with. Because Joseph, people have the idea that Joseph was some type of carpenter. On the contrary, Joseph was not a carpenter. Joseph was a construction manager. And him being a construction manager, he was the person who could do all the prints. He could do the architecture. He could do the city planning. He could do all of those things. And that was what Joseph had done for Sepphoris. It was a place that was really high tech. And Joseph was the person who was in charge of all of that. So he knew which girls were the girls that were the ones that you wanted to get. And he wanted the one that belonged to the librarian. That's the one that he wanted. And so what happened was that the angel had shown, the light had shown everywhere around the angel. The heavenly host came in. The shepherds said, let us go and see this thing which the Lord is showing us. Let's go there and let's see what's happening. So they go. And when they go, the angels announce to them that you're going to find this baby lying in a manger and swaddling cloths. That's pretty interesting that you're going to find Jesus in the very same way that you found the lambs. Because Jesus was in the very same cloths that those animals were that were sacrificed for the sins of the people. And Jesus was now, even at his birth, the sign to them. Because they understood what those cloths were. And God said to them, and this will be the sign to you. You're going to find the cloths. And when you find those cloths, then you'll know that you're there. So they said, let us go down and let us find this baby. Let us find his mother and his father. Let us go there and let us see who this is. Now, as this thing all occurred, they came upon this manger. And when they came upon this manger, it was that all of the shepherds had gone in there and they saw what the Lord had told them. They gazed and said, isn't this wonderful? And they went and they told everyone all about what God had shown them and how God was having mercy upon his people. And they told the whole world. But you know, it was interesting. We've never heard about the shepherds again. We hear about the little drummer boy. How that the little drummer boy, he's just, he's got his parumpa-pum-pum going. And as he's got all of that happening, and he turns around and even one of the lines in there, he turns and says, I'm poor. And he turns again and he says, I don't bring anything to the king. But there across, at least a 2-month trip coming down from Babylon, there were some men who at best were Zoroastrians, just astrologists. At worst, they were Persian royalty. But the Persians had different legs of the branches of their government. And so what these men were was that these men actually had studied the stars. They were able to lay out the time frames upon the earth and show by the stars the historical events that had not only occurred up until that point, but also those things which were about to occur from that point on. But now this situation that came with these people that we call the wise men. Wise men were very interesting because wise men, whatever they had done, they always did with great pomp. They always did it with great ceremony. They were people that had really, really embraced the idea that they were going somewhere to discover this king. And they wanted to be the first to be able to not only invite him, but to welcome him to the earth. When they actually traveled, they traveled in such a way, they traveled in a way that they traveled in sequence and in the number of their importance. If you were the most important, you would travel as number one. If you were the next important, you would travel as number two. And the least important of the three, which was still very important, he traveled lastly. Now, even to this day, there's a 99% surety that 3 skulls that are being held in a cathedral in Germany today are the skulls of the 3 wise men. Historically, they say that there is 99% surety. And it's interesting about the skulls that when they actually did the study on those bones, one of them was an older man. Another one of the kings was a middle-aged man. And then the one that went third in procession, he was a young man. The 3 wise men had spanned 3 different generations that came to worship Jesus at one time. It wasn't just your grandmother's religion. It wasn't something that you kind of held on to, because this is what Granny always did, and so because this is what Granny did, then this is what we do. On the contrary, what it was that there was an older, wise individual, a middle-aged man who was a king who came to worship, and a younger king who had the wisdom of the ages, who came to bow his knee to this newborn king. Well, what happened was that this star had appeared to them some 2 years previous to them ever really going on this journey, because the journey really took them approximately 2 months. They came down from Babylon. But now, why 2 years? Because it took 2 years for them to be able to accumulate the gifts that they were about to bring. 2 years for them to do it. If that wasn't quite enough, what happened was that when they were nearing Jerusalem, what occurred was that the star was lost. And when the star was lost, they decided what they were going to do was that they were going to stop in and they were going to see Herod to find out from Herod, because no doubt he had already done the research himself already, and he was interested in being able to worship the King of the Jews himself. But when they got there, there was no small stir that was going on inside of Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us that all Jerusalem was in a stir when they saw these 3 kings that were coming into Jerusalem. It is said that in the security guard that was traveling with these 3 kings, there were approximately 10,000 soldiers that were coming with them. Now, this, Josephus, the Jewish historian, even says the same thing. What he says is this. He said that when Jews lived somewhere in Parthia, they lived in Persia, what they would do is that they would take some of their riches and they would want to send them back into Israel, and when they wanted to send them back into Israel, you could fall into some tremendous problems. You could not only fall into those problems with some type of robbers that you met on the way. But the biggest problem that they found was that it wasn't with the robbers that would attempt to be able to rob the people or rob the caravans as they were on their way into Israel. What it was that the actual satraps, which were the governmental leaders, would actually gather their armies together so that they would be able to overtake those caravans, and they themselves would confiscate all of the riches that the caravan had. And so in Luke chapter 2, it gives us the entire story about the wise men. So the wise men show up, and when the whole city is turned upside down because there's 10,000 soldiers that now just have come upon it without any warning whatsoever, what happened was that they went in to see Herod, and when Herod finally knew that they were near, he had called all of the religious leaders. And he said to them, he said, you tell me where the king of the Jews was to be born. And they said he was going to be born in Bethlehem of Judea. So he knew. Now, what you need to understand about Herod was this, was that Herod was one who had become a friend of the Romans. And in becoming a friend of the Romans, he then was given this province to be able to rule over as the king. So Herod was someone that was very freaked out over the fact that there would be any other king other than himself. He really even went to the point to where he had an affair with Cleopatra because he did not want to have any other king that would come on the premises while he was sitting upon his throne. And thus, because that he did not want that, he would do anything to make certain that that did not happen. And so when the three kings, or the wise men, actually went in to speak with Herod, Herod said, now really, tell me, 10,000 men, do you come in peace? Do you know? Oh, really? Please, when you find this king, can't you bring me word? Because what I would like to do is I would love to be able to come and worship him too. And so what they did was this, was that they actually, instead of doing what Herod wanted, as they came out of there, the star reappeared. And it took them over to Nazareth. Because this was 2 years later. And the Bible says, and then when the wise men came upon the boy in his house, he was no longer in the animal cave. He was no longer this infant that was wrapped in swaddling clothes. It now was over 2 years later, and Jesus was this young boy. And because Jesus was this young boy, then they came in, and the three kings began to descend in ceremony off of their camels and began to present gifts to their king. And the first one came off, and he brought out the gold. However long it took for them to be able to present these things to Jesus, they presented them. And Mary could not think of what in the world is all of this that is going on here. There are just times in life when you don't understand. But you don't have to. There's an independent Baptist university that had done a study on what the value of the gold, frankincense, and myrrh actually was that were presented to Jesus. And what the independent Baptist university said was that the value of the gifts that were given to Jesus by the by the Magi was approximately 400 million US dollars. Now you'd say, well, now why in the world was there so much money that was given to Jesus at that time? Well, there are small speculations about that, because right after all of these gifts, whether it be the gold or the frankincense and the myrrh, that they came to worship the king with, right after that particular time, and the wise men going home another way and not going the way that Herod wanted them to go. When they did that, Herod actually went into a rage. And when he went into a rage, what he did was this. He began to kill every child that was 2.5 years old and younger. So that's how you know how old Jesus was when Herod began to kill all the male children, 2.5 and under, was because Jesus wasn't an infant anymore. He now was at least 2 years old. And so what Herod did was he got all of the male children and he killed the male children under the age of 2.5. Herod knew that he had a problem on his hand. How he was going to fix it, that was what he did not understand. He lived in a tirade, and he was so angry, even to the point to where Joseph and Mary knew that they could no longer live in Israel at all. They could not live anywhere in Israel, and to be able to survive, they would have to be running and running and running from that moment forward. And so what they did was they went down to Egypt. But that presents another problem. And the problem that it begins to present is, how in the world did they get all of the things that took 10,000 men to guard? How did they get that to go with them for 7 years and nobody bother them? If it was 10,000 men that had guarded it the first time, how in the world was Joseph and Mary going to be able to go from place to place and have no one notice them? Everyone else noticed these three kings. How in the world could they get around and not be noticed? That's where Mary's father comes in. Mary's father was a person that was so connected in Sepphoris that what they did, and Sepphoris was a free place. Sepphoris was this independent geography. Had no enemies, had no friends. I'm just everybody's buddy. That's all. I want no misunderstandings between us. So what they believe had occurred was they took all of those things which came in the gold and frankincense and myrrh and began to ration to Joseph and Mary as they went from place to place the finances that were necessary in order for them to be able to continue their lifestyle throughout the 7 years that they were in Egypt and flight. And so they believe that it was Mary's father that was able to bring to Mary and her family those things which were necessary. As a matter of fact, that throughout the life of Jesus, those things were things that had financed much of what Jesus had done throughout his lifetime. But now, these people, these magi, these ones that could read the stars and know who in the world that it was that was going to be this king of the Jews. And they were willing to come and fall down and worship him. I often wondered, whatever happened to the shepherds? Do you know sometimes things become so familiar, they become invisible. There are times when what I do is I think a little bit about our time, mine and Linda's time, when we first got married, and how that after we became a believer, and we were married for about a year and a half when we came to Christ. But what happened to us immediately was that we began to have a greater respect and an understanding for God and about God than the people that were around us. Because the people that were around us had already seemed to have gotten familiar. Bible stories? Didn't mean very much. Respect? Didn't seem like respect was such a really big thing, you know. I'm a believer too, in Jesus' name, just like you. Respect wasn't a big thing. Consecration, dedication. I started thinking this morning about character and lifestyle and all these things, and I thought the one thing that is missing, which is really not missing, it's just being neglected. It's the elephant in the proverbial room right now, and that is sanctification. What is it that you're telling yourself no about? What is it that you're cleaning up? What is it that you're allowing God when He said, "Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good for the use of edifying, that you may minister grace"?
If you are in the Tinley Park area, we would love for you to join us at any of our services. We have a 5 p.m. service on Saturdays, and on Sundays we have a 9:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. service. We also have a midweek service on Wednesdays at 7:15 p.m. With over 30 years of ministry, FHC has something for everyone. To find out more about FHC, like us on Facebook or go to our website, fhclife.org, or call our office at 708-614-6000. We look forward to seeing you soon.